Nick Cave, Australia's dark prince of gothic rock and rousing balladry, has been a mainstay of the alternative music scene since the late 1970s. He has gifted us with more than 30 records across numerous collaborations. Today, I'm going to attempt to distill his most essential recorded moments into 9 records that I think you should check out. Honestly, Nick has made so few missteps that you could fill this list in a number of different ways. I've attempted to create a neat career overview and a set of potential entry points for the curious. From his most chaotic to his most spiritual and soothing, these are my 9 essential records from Nick Cave. By late 1979, Nick had all but conquered Melbourne's alternative music scene with The Boys Next Door, a collection of private school art freaks from Caulfield Grammar. They were Mick Harvey, Tracy Pugh, Phil Calvert, and later addition Roland S. Howard. Following a relocation to London, the perceived centre of the universe for alternative music, The Boys Next Door changed their name and underwent a violent rebranding, emerging as The Birthday Party. The ensuing LP, Junkyard, takes the first spot on our list. Doing away with peppy new wave stompers, The Birthday Party dealt in a rabid, punked-up, twisted version of the blues. This was perfected in album form on 1982's Junkyard. Their follow-up EP from the same year was equally intense, but I'm not going to fill up this list with Birthday Party releases, so we're just going to stick with Junkyard today. Junkyard sounds like it could fall apart at any minute, bottling their violent live shows into a record that is dangerous, funny, and darkly despondent. Side 1 opens with She's Hit, a sinister lounge track of evangelist murder and mourning over a relentlessly descending bass line and dueling guitar stabs. We're then pummeled by car crash rocker Dead Joe before Nick reimagines Shakespeare's most famous prince as a gun-toting, Cadillac-stealing psychopath on Hamlet, Pow Pow Pow. The Birthday Party collide high and low art, drawing gold from the scraps with a twinkle in their eye and hearts pumping black blood. Side 2 is no less uncompromising, with Nick assuming the guise of a Texan oil magnate wearing a suit of gold with greasy hair and God-given sex appeal on Big Jesus trash can. The whole thing concludes with the thunderous title track. I love this record. It's utterly bonkers. The sleazy Americana art from Ed Roth, the sinuous heavy bass playing from Tracy Pugh, and iconic guitar leads from Roland Howard. It also probably features some of Nick's most unhinged vocals. Sadly, the band just couldn't keep up this kind of intensity, disbanding within a year of releasing this record as a result of infighting and creative dissonance. Our next item is the sophomore release from Nick Cave's Bad Seeds, who formed from the ashes of The Birthday Party. The Bad Seeds would become a revolving door of musicians and various personalities who served stints across the group's decades of activity. Some of these would emerge as more prolific than others, but I think they all brought something. This early lineup included ex-Boy Next Door and Birthday Party member Mick Harvey, Blixa Bargeld of German industrial ghouls Einstürzend Neubauten, and Barry Adamson of Magazine. Following their debut from Her to Eternity in 1984, the band presented The Firstborn is Dead in 1985. This record is heavily inspired by Americana and the Delta Blues, which makes a strangely natural progression from what they were doing in The Birthday Party. The album was recorded at Hansa Studios in Berlin, which was the hallowed site where David Bowie and Brian Eno produced their iconic 70s trilogy. Well, 2 of the 3 anyway. Nick and the lads would mine the atmospherically bleak but creatively rich Berlin scene to excellent effect over the next few years. Side 1 begins with one of the group's most signature tunes, which is still performed to this day. A crack of thunder issues in the rumbling bass line of Tupelo, a track loosely inspired by John Lee Hooker's Talkin' Blues, which is a song about a flood in Tupelo, the birthplace of Elvis Presley. Nick diverts these waters, though, to the night of the king's birth, the mythic becoming reality. It's a fascinatingly evocative listen with whip-crack drumming and quivering slide guitar. Album highlight Knockin' on Joe kicks off the second half of the record. This is one of my favourite tracks. Knockin' on Joe is referencing an expression used by American prisoners to describe the desperate measures they would take in order to avoid hard labour by crushing fingers, hands, legs, whatever it took. Pretty grim stuff. It's both sorrowful and transcendent, the whole thing elevated by Mick Harvey's stirring piano melodies. Mick Harvey, man, this guy is probably the most underrated bad seed in my opinion. Total goat. obsessed with Mick Harvey. We finish up with a Dylan Cash interpolation of Wanted Man and Nick's ode to legendary bluesman Lemon Jefferson. He even has a good old honk on the harmonica too, which is fun. The First Born is Dead is often overlooked in the Bad Seeds catalogue, but I highly recommend everyone check it out and dip into the gothic blues fantasy. The 80s proved a fertile time for Nick, with the Bad Seeds delivering 2 full-length records in 1986. We received Covers album, Kicking Against the Pricks, and the darkly carnivalesque Your Funeral, My Trial. Then, in 1988, Tender Prey. By all reports, this record was absolutely hell to make for a variety of reasons. Drugs. And it holds a complicated place in the Bad Seeds catalogue. The band would still get loud in the decades following this, but they would never sound this desperate. The Bad Seeds in 1988 were Nick, Mick, Blixer, Kid Congo Powers from LA's The Gun Club, Swiss D-Hout drummer Thomas Vidler, and German pianist Roland Wolf. Tender Prey opens with a Bad Seeds classic, The Mercy Seat. And if you've seen this thing performed live, you know that it is truly something. 7 minutes of thundering bass, swirling guitars, and shrieking strings as Nick plays an inmate on death row staring down the electric chair. It's been in the band's live setlist ever since, and to witness it live is truly something to behold. The tone is set here for a record that marries the intensely dramatic with gallows humour. Nick's fascination with Americana is still present, but it's settled really comfortably into the mix. We have the gospel-influenced Deanna and his take on 1920s blues tune City of Refuge. The real showstopper on this one is the shockingly tender, yes, that is what it says on the tin, Watching Alice, which is a weirdly disarming story about a peeping Tom watching a young girl dress. And I know, yes, it's really weird, please do not cancel me on my first video, but the sincerity of it is really quite striking. There's a beautiful harmonica solo and a piano solo. Just check it out. This is Nick Cave we're talking about here, and he would go on to write some of the finest romantic ballads ever penned, and I think it starts here, but Very soon after this, Nick checked himself into a clinic, and after a stint in rehabilitation, emerged to lead the Bad Seeds onto their next evolution. After the tumultuous sessions for Tender Prey, Nick piloted the group into the 90s with the ballad-heavy record The Good Son and the rollicking Henry's Dream. This period is well documented on our next release, the excellent live record appropriately titled Live Seeds. This was compiled from a series of shows throughout 92 and 93. It was actually released on wax for the first time last Record Store Day. In the preceding years, the band had reformatted once again with the addition of two new Australian members. The iconic Martin Casey from fellow cult Australian band The Triffids on bass, and Conway Savage on keys, joining Mick, Blixer, and Thomas. Live Seeds sounds amazing. The crowd atmosphere is really well applied to help transport the listener all these years later. The project was well reviewed by a number of critics who praised the record and say that some of these live songs sounded better than their recorded studio counterparts, sometimes foregoing texture in favour of intensity, which is, I suppose, the kind of thing you would expect from a rock show. All the favourites of the era are here, with storming renditions of The Mercy Seat and Tupelo, along with favourites from The Good Son. The touching ship song and crowd favourite Weeping Song, which is a duet with Blixer, really shine against the violent and lusty tales from Henry's Dream. A union of the sacred and profane performed with equal fervour. Nick even tackles Nina Simone's classic Plain Gold Ring with wild abandon. Live Seeds climaxes with a terrifying rendition of From Her to Eternity before one last come down with New Morning, which is the last track from Tender Prey. The following three records are perhaps the hottest streak in the band's catalogue, representing a commercial and critical high point for the Bad Seeds. 1994's Let Love In is the first in Nick's Holy Trilogy and a linchpin in the Bad Seeds' discography. It distills everything that has come before it into a neat blueprint for the next few years. Lover Man rages with the fury of their late 80s dirges. Nobody's Baby picks up the torch of balladry that was ignited on The Good Son. And Red Right Hand cements Nick's reputation as one of the certified princes of gothic rock. This tune has enjoyed endless airtime in popular culture, with covers by Arctic Monkeys and Snoop Dogg, and featured in shows like Peaky Blinders and the film Scream. Good grief, it's getting dark and thundery. The Bad Seeds in 94 were Nick, Mick, Blixer, Thomas, Martin, and Conway. But Let Love In is also significant because it is the first record to feature prominent mainstay, Warren Ellis. He appears here as a guest musician before he actually formally joins the band. Warren Ellis's violin work and tempestuous arrangements with the Dirty Three form another one of Australia's most iconic and cherished discographies. Also, American multi-instrumentalist Jim Sclavunis would join the group for the following tour, but he doesn't actually perform on this record. There is so much to enjoy about this record, starting off with the bass playing from Casey. Right off the bat, Do You Love Me goes straight for the hips and is reprised in a more somber fashion at the end of the record. These two tracks bookending the album perfectly, but also encapsulating in just two songs everything that the Bad Seeds are capable of. There's plenty of beautifully schmaltzy piano work from Savage and washes of keyboard from Harvey that really helps suit the sonic tone of the record. Nick himself is in fine lyrical form throughout. I particularly enjoy in Love a Man the spelling lesson where Nick says that A is for any old how, darling, and N is for any old time. There's also a lot of great bells and triangles on this record, and honestly ask yourself, when was the last time you listened to a record and thought, shit, the bells on this record are really good? Doesn't happen often, but I think it happens here. The scene is set for their next ghoulish outing, Murder Ballads from 1996. This one is held up by many as the quintessential Bad Seeds LP, and fair enough, because honestly, it's all here. The drama, the violence, the humour, the romance. This is definitely a record that everyone, fan or not, needs to hear at least once in their life. The premise is simple: 10 songs about killing or being killed. These range from crushingly sad songs about failed romance or misplaced trust to absolute horror show romps. Apparently Nick was taking inspiration from some of the more violent hip-hop songs that had started bubbling up in the early 90s, fusing their street scene violence with his love of morbid storytelling and folk songs. Murder Ballads was my first contact with Nick Cave, and it certainly made an impression. Tracks like Stagger Lee, The Curse of Millhaven, and 14-minute epic O'Malley's Bar are veritable orgies of death from the perspective of the killers. Most famously though, this record is responsible for Nick's biggest hit. In some baffling turn of events, Nick scored a hit with the song Where the Wild Roses Grow, which was a love at first sight duet with Kylie Minogue, and in the end he bashes her head in with a rock. This song was a hit thanks to an iconic music video and the undeniable, if somewhat incongruous, chemistry of the duet partners. Murder Ballads actually boasts a number of collaborations, so it really is Nick's hip-hop record, including a nasty little turn with PJ Harvey. Now, PJ was a flame of Nick's at the time, and in their song together, she stabs him to death and throws him down a well. This is the world of Murder Ballads. It somehow manages to walk the line perfectly between being both genuinely unnerving and wildly entertaining. The gang all then wrap up with a huge group vocal sing-along to Bob Dylan's Death Is Not the End. Mwah. The trilogy is closed off with our 7th record, The Boatman's Call, which dropped the following year. Having taken what Nick describes as a holiday with Murder Ballads, the band roll up their sleeves and really get deep on this one. The sense of fun and reckless abandon has cleared out the proverbial pipes, with Nick primed to deliver his most personal work to date. This is the collection of heart-aching ballads. Miserabilism wrote large over 12 tracks. Just look at the cover. The band steers the ship towards waters of the heart, both gentle and tumultuous. One of Nick's most beloved Torch songs, Into My Arms, is just a gorgeous track. Simple in sentiment, but everlasting in impact. I love when Nick has the opportunity to speak to God, that he begs that not a hair be touched in your head and that he should just leave you be, because in that moment, you are perfect. It's really very sweet. Tracks like Lime Tree Armour and Brompton Oratory boast some of my favourite Bad Seeds melodies on any LP. The sounds are so beautiful and delicate throughout thanks to the masterfully restrained performances from the band. The thing that makes the Bad Seeds one of the greatest groups in rock is that they know when to be absent. I mean, there are so many men in this band at this point, but each one of them knows when to just not be there. It's pretty incredible, and I think it's clear across their whole catalogue that they know when to hang back and they know when to really bump it out. So good. Everyone understands the assignment and nothing here is overcrowded. This one features Nick, Mick, Blixer, Martin, Conway, Thomas, Jim, and for the first time officially, Warren Ellis. Songs like People Ain't No Good really give an indication of where Nick's heart is for the majority of these songs. Many cite his relationship with PJ Harvey as the inciting incident for a number of these songs, including Black Hair and West Country Girl. The Boatman's Call is a beloved Australian classic, and I believe, honestly, that it deserves a place in every home. Our next entry appears 10 years later, during which time the Bad Seeds had produced No More Shall We Part, Nocturama, and the ambitious double album, Abattoir Blues, The Lyre of Orpheus. These efforts all have their moments and are well worth exploring in time, but the 8th spot on our list goes to Nick's beardy back-to-basics side project, Grinderman, and their debut album. Nick picks up a guitar and joins Warren, Marty, and Jim for a raucous midlife crisis of unfulfilled libido, domestic debauchery, and facial hair. Noisy loops underpin a lot of the wild performances on this LP. Kicking the opening cut Get It On into the sewer as Nick sings about the blues in the most primordial fashion, still sporting the flippers of his amphibious ancestors. The comically feral No Pussy Blues is what it says on the tin, and the sultry Electric Alice slinks along to Marty's languorous bass lines. Depth Charge Ethel and Honeybee provide the high-octane thrills, while Man in the Moon sneaks under the radar as a surprisingly beautiful ballad about a boy and his father. As with Murder Ballads, there are some lyrical sections on this LP that come across rather jarringly in 2022, but I do still think they have their place, but I can understand if people would want to avoid it for these reasons. Grinderman is a strange beast, an LP of deliriously dumb rock and roll from the perspective of your weird uncle who's had one too many cans at the family gathering. This project went on to reinvigorate the Bad Seeds, who would produce the rock-orientated Dig Lazarus Dig the following year. There are some great tracks on that record, but the final spot on our list belongs to 2016's Skeleton Tree. This record was infamously recorded in the aftermath of the death of Nick's son, Arthur. It is a devastating listen at times that really tears at the heart, but is ultimately triumphant and heartfelt. The album is pitched on a bed of atmospheric sonics, burbling electronics, and Warren Ellis's loops. These pair beautifully with lush swells of string instrumentation and sparse supportive playing from the Bad Seeds. Marty, Jim, Tommy, and new guitarist George Vegestica? Sorry, George. Mick and Blixer sadly departed in 2009 and 2003, respectively. Skeleton Tree opens with the epic and evocative Jesus Alone to instantly cinematic effect. Cave's baritone rumbling to life over the eerie instrumentation. Girl in Amber and Magneto draw from desperately painful wells, seeming to render the paralysis of Cave's wife in the depths of her grief and his own desperation refracted through his drug-addled past and the hard blues he wrestles with in the supermarket queues. The couples in these songs pull and push each other in breathtaking fashion, grief so palpably wrought into these performances. On the second side, Anthracene greets us with crackling drums while Nick prowls the emotional wilderness before pleading to his lover on I Need You to return back from the brink. It's one hell of a journey to go on. Since Skeleton Tree, we've had a pair of records that tread similar ground, with Warren Ellis moving to the forefront as his main collaborator. But what Nick and co will do next is anyone's guess, so we'll just have to wait and see. My fingers are still firmly crossed for Grinderman 3. So did I get it right? What are your picks? What's your favourite Bad Seeds record? Who's your favourite Bad Seeds member? What's your favourite lineup of the band? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. This is my first video. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.